with that. Do you just like the thing?
I do.
From the tower to the speaker crane and then the idiots.
What's that? Every day. You know that. Test, test. Test.
Sad. Oh, that is a good idea.
Well, it's full through the field, Sydney.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Sorry. Just so you know.
Very much.
Looks like 6 o'clock to me. Well, wait a half a minute or?
Oh, that's what makes us so wonderful.
I'm still going to bring us to order. So welcome guests. This is the Ellensburg City Council study session. And I guess we're going to talk about the event center tonight. Does the city manager have anything to?
Absolutely. I'll just
open with?
do a real soft opening here. Welcome to some folks from the Kittitas Valley Event Center. They approached the city on interest for a potential partnership, looking at the value of the event center and the needs for some infrastructure improvements. And so we thought we'd invite them to the study session. I will have maybe Katie kick off and do some introductions and really provide a presentation to council.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Katie Porterfield. I am the director of the Kittitas Valley Event Center.
And Commissioner for District 3.
I'm Patty Stacy. I am the county solid waste and maintenance and facilities director.
I'm Carl Jensel, Councilor 34. And I'm Brian Twardowski, President of the Ellensburg Rodeo Association.
Great, thank you. So I guess Katie, are you doing the presentation?
Yes, I'd love to kick off. So I believe you've all received some documents in your agenda. I do have one addition. This is our 60% project design that the revised in February 2020. That is our full. You guys have some visuals, of course. And so the revisions that were done today were mostly updating the year's project schedule, some of the cost estimations, of course, after everything. I said our last project estimate was February of 2020, and so that needed some updating after the pandemic and everything that we're in with the current state of economy. But we're presenting this item before you today because this, we believe, is going to have significant positive impacts, not only on the Kittitas Valley Event Center facility and our events, but for the community as well. You all received an economic impact study report for the event center based off of our 2019 events. That was our last full year. And that report was based off of research and estimates that totals of numbers from those events in 2019 and reports from Washington State Tourism that we were able to gather data from. Event Center hosts about 1,000 events every year. And we value spending locally when we're purchasing and contracting, as well as giving back to our community. So those economic impact numbers relate all of those as well. And then a lot of that economic impact, majority of that is generated here in the city of Ellensburg, but it does spread out through some of the rest of the county as well. So, and then if you look at the bottom part of that economic impact report, that briefly overviews of what just the rodeo arena did. And in 2019, it shows it generated over $6.5 million estimated in economic impact. However, that was a slow year for the rodeo arena. There were a lot of events that had gone away the year or two prior to that were not in there in 2019. But that is the current, what 2019 was projected to be. So with that, we actually estimate that if you're looking at that $6.5 million, by the way, includes the rodeo, Ellensburg rodeo, over Labor Day weekend. So, which is the majority of that $6.5 million. If you take the rodeo out, it's going to be somewhere around maybe somewhere in between 1.5 and not quite $2 million estimated. We believe, after looking at numbers of what the potential is for that arena, we believe for non-rodeo, so the rest of the year-round events in that arena could generate 3 times of what it's doing now from an economic impacts standpoint. With the number of people we can bring in, the events that we currently have that are growing and becoming very successful, and potential new clients that have some of them have inquired about using the facility for different types of things. And then others are potentials that we would like to see come as well, and maybe be able to work with based on the type of facility we have. There is more potential there. However, a lot of that potential, some of that will not be possible without some major improvements. And the major improvements within this project is a big piece of that. And the main focus of that is adding in accessibility, safety, and functionality. We want to be able to have stands that people are attracted to, can come and feel safe in, have proper utilities and easy access, ADA, all those great things that you can see in a facility when you go to enjoy an event. So, and also a great focus that we have on this one is also improving our ability to handle not only local but statewide emergency management events. Being in Ellensburg, we are the most centrally located city in the state, and we're at the intersection of all the major crossroads as well. This makes us look like to everybody, at least from here all the way west of us, we're the first stop on the map running away from anything that's happening, whether that be a major wildfire or something like Cascadia Rising. So that is something that's always on our forefront, is are we going to handle a mass amount of people and emergency personnel in the current facilities that we have, and how can we improve on that to be able to house and take care of people, animals, those sorts of things. Any other things, so outside of just being able to handle emergency type situations like that, so we want to attract new clients, a nice new facility with those kinds of additions in it to make it more attractive where people want to hold events. But it's also going to help maintain our large ones that are becoming more and more successful. Of course, our largest one is the Ellensburg Rodeo, and not very many facilities get to say that they hold one of the top 10 rodeos in the entire nation. I've only lived here like 4 years, and I haven't had to live here very long, honestly, to be very proud of that fact. That's pretty cool. So this county entity of the event center, the county and the Ellensburg Rodeo have been partners a really long time. This is the 99th year, and that's been a pretty successful partnership over the years. So I just want to turn it over to Carl now and talk a little bit more about that history and our partnership and some of the partnerships with the city as well.
Do you guys want to do your presentation and then have questions, or would you entertain questions?
I think questions throughout might be beneficial.
So, Katie, just a question. I mean, on the bottom side of the economic impact, you talked about, we know that the fair and rodeo take up X number of days, and that's a very focused, and it's surely the largest. But when we were going through that, you indicated how many events actually are coming in, not as an assigned dollar amount, but if you were to look over the next year, what's your availability, particularly of the rodeo arena? Because I think we're really talking about.
Yeah, especially compared, thank you for bringing that question up. So compared to 2019, my goal when I started, I saw the huge potential to grow events in that rodeo arena, and my goal was to have it booked every single weekend from April 1st to October 1st. And I currently did that except the exception of one weekend. So we have events, some of them are smaller, but that's okay. It's part of the goal. We have an event on that rodeo arena every single weekend. But we have the potential to add a lot more as well. So that's been a really positive. This year, we're building a lot of relationships, and people really do love to come to Ellensburg and host their events.
Thanks.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. Inside your packet of many pages, there's a kind of a summary sheet of what the Ellensburg Rodeo has been partners at the event center, and some of the things that we have done individually. Even though we are a tenant for 17 days a year, we continue to make improvements, which then turn over to the event center, which they can then utilize throughout the year. So our impact, besides our event, is facility upgrades that we do that are then in turn turned over to the community to utilize throughout the rest of the year. I'm not sure how many of these you want me to highlight, but I think some of the key ones are the fact that we have been partners with the city of Ellensburg and the event center in improvements. The Buckaroo stands, which were constructed in 1991, they're the aluminum grandstands where the rough stock chutes are. That was a debt payment where the city and the Ellensburg Rodeo committed to a 20-year payoff. We ended up paying it off a little bit faster than that. The South Grandstands, which is the wood white grandstand, that was constructed or reconstructed in 2001. It was labeled a historic facility building, and we were able to retrofit it and continue to utilize it at the event center. Some of the things, the rodeo itself has just the Gold Buckle Club, which sits on the east end where we host VIP and membership. That's utilized throughout the year by the event center for whether it be graduation parties, weddings. The same can be said for the Western Village, which we also constructed and then turned over to the event center. So section 9, which is the aluminum grandstands, we actually took that on ourselves and built that and replaced some dilapidated wood grandstands that were there. That's, if you remember, that was the same time we actually took the track out, which used to circle in front of the main grandstands. More recently, in 2016, we partnered with the event center to replace the dirt. That sounds a little bit funny, but putting in dirt in a rodeo arena is extremely important. So we partnered with them and installed the drain system, replaced all of the dirt, and now we have some of the best dirt out on the rodeo circuit. We are privileged as a rodeo board. There's 17 volunteer members, directors that put on this event, and our legacy, like Katie said, this is year 99. It's our mission to always carry on the legacy of the Ellensburg Rodeo, the quality of the event. Obviously, what Katie was saying, how we are, considered one of the top 10 rodeos. We also were just inducted into the Pro Rodeo Hall of Fame in 2020, which is a great feather in our cap, and it shows you the quality of the event that we put on. This project started in 2015 or 16, so it's been going on a ways, but when we first identified it, it wasn't about what specifically the Ellensburg Rodeo needed. It was what the event center needed and what the community and other user groups that Katie talks about that utilize the event center throughout the year, as well as the ability for, large site, whether it be wildfire camps, evacuation camps, there's been animals stored there, there's been fire camps there. Those were all part of the process. So we always get to be on the title, the Ellensburg Rodeo event, arena. This has always been a community event, and it's always been a community center. The things that were identified first and foremost was safety. The West Grandstand, which was built in 1961, has outlived its useful life. The steel structure that supports the wood and plastic seating is continually being checked and reviewed for stress, fatigue, potential, structural failure. Accessibility, we currently have, I believe, 46 accessible seats in the 9,000 seats that we have at the Ellensburg Rodeo Arena. And those were all improvements that we made specifically to add those, but there is no other location. The new replacement of the grandstands would quadruple that. Accessible seating, and then I'm sure if you've been to the rodeo and tried to use a restroom at the rodeo grounds, currently we place 46 porta potties on site just for there might be 46 total bathrooms on site, and I don't even know if that's numbered, but they are in rough shape, to say the least. So the value and the quality of being able to be at the event is severely impacted by that. People come regardless, which shows you that it is a great event too, and to use the events of the rest of the year. But that by far is something that is going to be addressed. The other thing is vendors on site. Currently, there's portable gray water tanks, the ability to have triple sinks to meet health codes and things like that it's a challenge, to say the least. The incorporation of some of the concession stands into beneath the restrooms with the facilities that are required to meet the public health requirement is another huge improvement. With that, I guess that kind of summarizes why the thing is. I guess just to make sure you know, it is the west and northwest grandstands and the northeast grandstands that are being replaced. Everything else, the Buckaroo sections, the Gold Buckle Club, the south grandstands in section 9, all will remain in place, as will our historic red concrete wall. We are going to build behind it. The lighting that we were able to work with the city of Ellensburg through Buddy Stanovich and the grant and Katie and Patty, that currently will not have to be changed at all. So there's a lot of facilities that are in place now that will remain there, but there are some things that have been identified that need to be updated. So with that, if there's some questions for me or for Brian, I would be happy to.
Can you just repeat? So the goal is to replace the west and
Right. So
northeast?
on the west side, if you were looking at your packet that Katie just gave you, if you're actually looking at the front page, the thing to the left of the bowl is AA through JJ, which is from the up and over from the south grandstands where you come up and over the track, which is another focal point of safety. Because from that section over to the Buckaroo sections, which are aluminum. And then on the other side of the Buckaroo sections, from the ambulance, what we call the ambulance gate, to the Gold Buckle Club. Those are the two locations of where the stands would be replaced and where new restrooms, concessions, utilities would be installed.
Starting on page 4 of that design, you'll see the overall site plan, and that'll show the two sections will be replaced with the existing buildings around it that are staying. And then past that, that'll start to show the breakdowns of the new restroom facility locations and the concession stands and so on from there.
Go ahead, Bruce.
As you're doing this, we're talking about the arena and the seating, but is it also safe to say that you would create additional venues for concerts that would enhance the visitor experience?
So, yeah, so the infrastructure, when we talk about restrooms, concessions, things like that, obviously are going to have a huge impact because currently, every year that we hold our event, people come set up trailers. So in this case, facilities will be available throughout the year and built in place. Behind the chutes, which is our term which is our beer garden, that will be expanded and will be able to be utilized year round, which it currently is also, people utilize it for wedding receptions. It'll be utilized in Bears and Bronx here in 2 weeks by Daniel Beard with music and live. So those improvements will be accessible throughout the year
And would allow a broader range of events with potentially
absolutely.
more
Yeah, the expansion and thank you
with
for bringing that
with
up.
more attendance,
Yes,
specifically actually for behind the shoots and then ultimately what you would be able to.
absolutely. We have identified that as a spot on the well, within our project that we needed to expand because we have the ability to generate more revenue, but then it could be utilized throughout the year. And so we're working with other user groups. That was part of the reason why it's the size it is. It might be a little big for some of them, but it's big enough to draw different events throughout the year now as well.
Okay, good. And then one other question, if I may.
Sure.
Looking at the partnership improvements, is it more or less accurate? Would look to me, I mean, the last time it looks as if we, the city partnered was in 2001.
That's correct. And that was, I believe it was a 20-year agreement, debt payment on the South Grandstands.
Right. So it looks to me that what's occurred historically would be that the city has partnered when there are this type of project, when it becomes a big ticket, significant improvement.
Absolutely. And
Is
your
when-
partnership has been the only reason that it's been able for those other projects to be completed.
That's essential to any of these, not only historically to your point, but as we look to shape and scope this project or even future things, you know, the only way this works is when we, the Rodeo Association, work with our partners at the county, but also then reach out to you folks. We really look at the event as a community asset. Carl and I are just the current, represent just the board that are current day custodians, but it's all volunteer. It's all blood, sweat, and tears. And we have a lot of volunteers across other segments of the community. We're not, we're a nonprofit, we're 501c4. And so everything that happens of consequence down there from a capital standpoint only happens through partnership. And we're also reaching out and have some conversations with the state. We were able to get a small amount of funds. We're hoping for more ultimately with a state partnership as well, but the state's really looking for local consortium is the right term, or just
Match.
commitment. To
Skin in
demonstrate
the
that.
game is what they say.
There we go.
So partnership is really the key term for all of this.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, but to break out on some of your costs and your details on the design. On the restroom summary, you have two categories, existing and proposed. Are the existing restroom facilities that are listed, those will remain after the renovation, is that right?
No, oh, actually, yeah, I'm gonna let Patty address that. Just
Okay, I was just trying to do the math here,
I
looking
can-
against
I
the
can
code.
I can address this. The restroom facilities that are there will all be gone and they
Okay.
will all be replaced.
Okay,
Anything that is under the grandstands now and by the chutes will be gone and we will be adding extra ones. Currently, the facilities on that side do not meet any ADA. requirements. So this is all bringing new utilities in.
so the proposed totals are newly built, not the total, correct? Because I was looking at the proposed totals against the code requirements and you're under code, so I assume there are other ones that are being preserved and renovated.
There are restrooms on the south side that are being reserved and will be reused.
Mhm.
This is just everything on the
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else?
Yes, real quick. So the partnership that we're talking about from a local perspective is the rodeo, the county, and the city. Are there any other partners?
hopefully legislative funding.
Legislative
I mean,
funding at
yeah.
the state level?
Yep. at the
Okay,
state level.
and you're going to get to how much?
Yeah, I'll be the nerd of the group.
Okay.
and talk about that in a second.
Well, and if we may, Rich, I think it's important to understand, there's already been a legislative commitment. Is that accurate?
Yes,
And
the
that-
legislature has gave us a grant of $1.5 million. We asked for 5.
Can I ask, so a few years ago, you guys brought a proposal to us. And then, and we never acted on anything, but then it just kind of went away. And then,
So I can maybe give you a little, so that was actually in, I believe, January of 2019. It might have been 20, but I believe it was 2019. We actually then went to the legislature with the same design, showing that, that we'd been talking to the city and that we were working with the event center. And it was just our initial exposure of this capital project to the legislature. It fell not on deaf ears, but just on a demand at the capital budget level in Olympia. So then, that was the first year of the biennium, so I'm not sure if that's the right year. So, but we went back in 20, or had conversations in 2020. They said it wasn't worth going over there. And then COVID. And so while we felt like we had some momentum and we were having these conversations with like the city council, once March of 2020 hit, it just shut everything down. The project itself, we didn't say we weren't going to do it. It was just really difficult to get any momentum or to pursue it. So this fall, we started discussing about identifying things that were really important to the rodeo board in our event, right? And the first thing, and one of the top things that came up was, if we don't address the facility that we're utilizing, at what point in time will we not have a facility and not be able to have the event? And so that's what's jump started it. So that's,
Yeah, I mean,
it's funny that over 3 years has gone by that quickly.
At the time, I remember this is an urgent safety issue that we have to deal with, or we may not be able to have the event because somebody might shut you down.
Absolutely.
But you haven't been shut down.
No.
Of course,
And,
you didn't
and I
have
guess
an
to make sure that,
event.
we just don't continually put lipstick on a pig and paint things, we identify structural things. We spend capital funding right now to continue to make the facility.
You do the Band-Aid fixes.
Exactly. And what we're trying to do is get away from that and create a safe, long-term project that we won't have to do that anymore.
And so just when I was mayor previously too, we'd had a conversation, I think early in this process, the 2016, 2017. And it kind of came to us at kind of the last minute. It was in the middle of our 2-year budget cycle. And so I appreciate that this is laid out in a way that, we've got time to look at it and budget for it. So.
Yeah, as we go into our 2-year budget. So, so Brett, I guess, money.
Okay. And I apologize, I should have kind of explained in the brief summary the 2 pages of the bond analysis that I included in your packet of information. And I'll probably start with the second page of that, which is the lower amount with the $700,000 in an annual debt service payment. And where the 700,000 came from and where the partnership is with the Ellensburg Rodeo and the county, Kittitas County has already said that we would come forward with $250,000 in an annual debt service payment. Ellensburg Rodeo and conversations with them have come forward with $200,000 in an annual debt service payment. So arbitrarily and just for conversation's sake, I plugged in $250,000 to get to the $700,000. If the city were to match what the county did. And then they're working with PFM, who are debt advisors, worked on a schedule from what it would look like for using $700,000 in annual debt service, both from the 15, 20, and 25 year commitment there. And then on the first page, just using the $12 million, not knowing at the time what ALSC was going to come forward with the added 1.5 million that was awarded to the county from the state of Washington, which would put us at 13.5 million. And just to know what the actual cost, if we were to look at funding the entire project without going back to the state for an ask to cover the difference between what would be funded or have the ability to be funded through the $700,000 portion versus the entire cost.
Could you say that one more time, but slower?
Well, I'm trying to look down because it's throwing me off that everything's transcribed up there. So.
So could I ask, so the second calculation, the 12 top down, not bottom up, 12
Okay,
million ends up with about 1.1 million in debt service compared to 700,000.
Yeah,
I mean,
is the annual debt
for
service,
the
yeah.
15 year.
For the 15 year. Mhm.
So the 700,000 calculation, did you apply that in each of the terms, 15, 20, 25? I didn't.
Yep, on that page for the 700,000,
okay.
that was applied to the 15 year, and it with the project fund total under uses, that's where we get the 7.5 million. And then if that were the number, then we would know 7.5 plus the 1.5. Then we know the difference between what LLC has come back with us and what we would need in state grant funding. to fund the entire cost.
So these don't include the 1.5 million.
That is correct.
So if, for example, we agreed to, if we agreed to 250,000 a year for 20 years, you could do
Just a little, the 9 million,
not,
we would be able to finance that. Obviously, the county would carry the debt. And then we would, on top of the 9 million, add the 1.5 million from the state.
to be able,
So
and then you would adjust your projects to meet the amount of funding?
Well, what we would probably do is adjust our amount for the remaining ask from the state legislature.
Okay, so ask for more
Or
from the
adjust the
state.
project.
You know,
Correct.
I think just, sorry to emphasize that, right? Brett's absolutely right. Plan A is to take that gap. You know, search and see how much of that gap they would fill.
Which is why the projection we got today projects start in 2024, because that way you could go to the next full session.
I think the second thing I want to say though, is Plan B, from a rodeo perspective, can't speak for anybody else, is to figure out what the local appetite is and what the partnership level is locally, so that we can get started. One of the challenges, back to the previous answer to Carl, the challenge to Carl was, the delay, the latency. We found that if we're waiting for everything to come together and get the stars to align, we end up waiting more and we end up waiting more. And unfortunately, the costs are just going out of control. So while I don't have a crystal ball and I don't know what the right answer is, from a rodeo standpoint, we think if we can go through this process and at least get some local capacity and appetite and set a budget, we can de-scope and at least get some momentum going. And then we'll see. We'll keep trying with the state or wherever else we have to go. But we feel like getting started responsibly with a great plan sooner rather than later is becoming essential.
oh, I was.
Go ahead, Dave.
So just to that point, your cost estimate, your 13.2, 13.3, you've built in cost of living inflation, if you will, escalation to 2024, right?
Yep,
So
that's-
you're already baking that in. So that's
Yeah,
good.
yeah, and that number is also projected actually for construction to start, June 2025,
Right.
based on that, yeah.
So, okay, so I guess my other question was, what percent complete are you on design? Are you complete or
We are at 60%,
60%? Okay.
and we weren't going to do that final phase until we felt like it was, that we had enough interest in the funding from a funding standpoint that we could do it. So,
And I guess the question on the design is, it's a 60% complete on the design. It's a full design, not a partial design,
It's a
right?
full design.
Whether you build it in phases or not, you'll have a complete design.
That's correct.
So what's the cost of going to the full design?
Oh, that wasn't the 12 million that.
I would say it's not, from my perspective, it's not significant. It ultimately costs far more to do incremental design, whether you build it in phases or not. If you come back and try to do an add-on design, it'll cost.
Yeah, no, I get
significantly.
that. I was actually, if it's incorporated in the 13 million, but you're already 60% done.
It is.
It's
You know,
included
that-
in the soft.
Oh, I
costs.
see. The
It's
difference
included.
between
Yeah, but the
2022,
phase-
It's just
2023.
not
The phase-
identified specifically as a line
Yeah,
item.
that'd be a soft cost, I guess. right?
Exactly. It's in the soft cost. So
What I was trying to get to is, in terms of, to Brian, to your point, it may be possible to fund the full design prior to going to the market. Because that,
I think that's the wise thing to do, is to try to get to that full design as soon as we have confidence that we've got enough budget capacity, and
Right.
commitment,
Yeah.
some form of progress to get started.
Your design fee is somewhere in the range of, what is it, about 10 to 12%, something like that, of total project cost?
The consultant's design fee is a 7%.
7%, okay. That's good.
and we've currently spent $268,000 to get to the 68% or 60%.
So you're expending funds already?
We have
Well,
already
the-
expended
The
$268,000.
county and the Elmsburg
Okay.
Rodeo have split the cost 50.
Okay, so
That's what.
And that's part of the 13.3 million you've already worked
And
toward.
the only reason I bring that, because I think part of what we want to do is ultimately, if we want to pursue this, is provide direction to the staff to come back for public discussion and a fuller discussion. But if I were to look at it in kind of, there have been two conversations that I've had going back to Rich's recollection, I think, of presentation. The previous city manager floated the idea of foregone revenue around our rural sales tax ask, which approximate $250,000. But my other thought was in terms of a phased approach, that we actually have information here on our lodging tax, that might be one of the other investments that we could make that would be outside of debt service.
And that, or, so the historic grandstands were funded with lodging tax. We bonded against that money, and so I asked that this, that we have some sense of what that lodging tax looks like. The other, like you, as you say, pot that we could look at is the 0.09 funding. Ellensburg has never guaranteed any portion of that. And I had questions about whether that is sunsetting or not. Did the legislature fix that?
They're working on it, but what we did, I believe, a year ago is we got clarity around when that was actually imposed, because we thought we were under the gun within a couple years that it might sunset, but that's actually been pushed back into 2030.
But still, we couldn't do a 20-year bond counting on that money.
As the law sits today, it's my understanding that it would be correct, but it is an active issue at the state level through counties to get that legislation.
I just had another thought as you were talking about bringing in more events, and there is the admittance tax, that admissions tax, and I didn't ask what that generates for the city of Ellensburg each year. I think that goes into the general fund.
I believe our contribution is nearly 85,000. I would need to double check that number for accuracy, but I think it's in the ballpark of 85,000.
For just the
Just the
rodeo.
Yes.
And I mean, not that the city manager would let us just allocate that, but because that's pretty basic general fund money for us. But I think an argument could be made if you're going to increase that amount. It's worth our participation.
So if we're talking funding sources, and again, I recognize this will eventually go on a future agenda. One of the things that was successful where I worked before in the CTAC area were rental car and room taxes per night for room taxes. And to me, this seems like that rental car is probably, well, is insignificant in this community, but for room tax is not. And the people who stay in rooms, whether it's $97 or $98, that may be something we can look at too. Because it's a buried cost. Nobody pays attention to that unless you get that number to be a really big number. In Seattle, it's like 28%.
So are you suggesting we could impose that?
Well, what I'm suggesting is that there aren't a lot of options for us from a taxing perspective in terms of sale. I mean, there's a lot of limitations. My understanding of those kinds of taxes for these kinds of uses, they funded stadiums in Seattle this way. That is a tax that is primarily paid for by people who don't live here, or they're not voting on it. And it also is a tax that is inconsequential to, whether or not somebody decides to stay in this hotel or not. That may be a way to potentially assist with, future funding without, stripping out some of the other things that we're doing with these monies. And again, I know this is a, 6 or 7 meetings worth of conversation that we can have, but.
Oh,
those are the
God,
kinds of
no,
taxes that-
no.
Long meetings.
So
With study sessions.
I was curious, and that's interesting. Could the attorney weigh in on the process that would need to be followed if council was interested in pursuing that? Is that a vote of the people or is it councilmatic? Or the
So
attorney- or
there are
manager?
a number of taxing sources or revenue sources that we could explore. And what I would recommend, rather than diving deep into any particular one, is that if there is council interest for pursuing a partnership, that we would bring back funding options and we can look into the benefits and costs of all of those.
I have admissions tax numbers if you want those.
Okay, yeah, sure.
So in 2018, the rodeo paid almost 41,000 in admissions tax. The county event center was or just over 7,000. And then in 2019, they paid almost 42,000 for the rodeo and just under 7,000 for the event center.
Ryan, you're probably thinking
Well,
you pay the county
on
too.
our books, we call it excise tax. I'm not sure if there's also a county component to that or not.
We always get less at the end, you know, everybody takes their little piece.
So in answer to, you know, what Heidi brought up, I mean, from a council perspective, I mean, again, we're not making decisions here, but I am interested in a partnership. I am interested in figuring out how to do this, recognizing that takes a formal action outside of a study session. But, you know, if the council is comfortable with looking at options and looking what those numbers look like and looking at sources, I mean, I say, you know, we can give that direction to staff and they can start down that process.
Anyone else?
I
wanna weigh in?
would agree with that. I think too, I would also be interested in diving into looking at the 0.09, our role on COG, and as one of the COG reps for the city, I think the idea of foregoing COG funding for City of Owensburg projects for a particular period of time, I don't know if it would match the bond period or not, as a contribution of sorts, even though, as the mayor pointed out, we're not guaranteed money ever. But as the largest community in the county, we see our share of money.
Well,
So,
if the county holds the debt, they might be more motivated.
yeah, perhaps. Big asks not funded, right? So anyway, I would like to, I'd like that menu of funding options, maybe in the same conversation, both the internal lodging tax funds, the COG 109, the tax, hotel tax options, things like that. I think it'd be a good conversation.
Be an interesting conversation at COG to just skim off that much.
Well,
or it-
yeah,
no,
Well, I mean,
allocated.
historically, I think if you look at what we've received, it's probably ranged between 175 to 250, more or less, on a fairly regular basis. And there have been times when we've been granted money and not expended money in what might be considered a timely manner. So I don't know that the COG numbers would necessarily, I mean, I think there's a couple things to recognize that the rural sales tax thing and COG members recognize the value, I would hope, recognize the value of a strong rodeo and event center as benefiting the entire county. So I mean, I think that's part of the conversation that we certainly could put forward there. And I think, you know, we would need an assurance, or the commissioners would need to recognize that they would need to make that commitment also. You know, because again, I mean, ultimately it's a commissioner decision.
Adam or Monica?
What, I did, not necessarily on the funding source. Can I bring up something else, or are there other thoughts on the funding source?
I think we're at the point of just taking the temperature. Are we interested in pursuing this at a future, directing staff to give us a breakdown of potential funding sources? And, if we want to pursue it. So, if we all look at them and say no, then we're done.
And if I may, just future is vague at times. I think we need to recognize that if we're going to move forward with this, there's the capacity to leverage the partnership with the legislature so that our decision-making process would need to align with what and how we work with our legislators going into the session.
So what is our timeline?
Well, I think realistically, if we're going to put something on the table, we would want to know easily by the end of the summer. You know, because that allows the framing of positions, that allows the legwork to happen with our local legislators. And then if there's other with whom we connect, you do that prior to session. So you grease the wheels before we get there.
Did you have another question, Monica?
Yeah, could I get clarification on that 60% project design? I know I'm like 10 minutes ago. This budget is for the full design at 100%,
That's correct.
but you haven't paid for the remaining 40%.
But it is included in
of-
the 7% soft costs that are in the total of the project costs. So while we've expended $268,000 for this 60% design, the remaining portion, which we're not sure that it's another 40% comparable, but we do know that it's included in the 7% soft costs and the total cost of the project.
So you're not completely done designing.
We were not going to move forward
Okay.
until we felt like it was worth spending that additional.
Then my follow-up questions are about the restrooms, since there's a whole page dedicated to them. So you have the existing restrooms for, that's for the rodeo arena alone?
The existing there,
Yeah,
those are the ones existing along the north side. So,
okay.
so these are the restrooms that are all encompassing to the areas that are going to be redone, the new construction based on this proposal. It
Okay.
doesn't include all the restrooms because there's more restrooms underneath the grandstands on the south side that aren't included in that.
Okay.
And those are the ones that Patty mentioned with.
Yeah, and part of it, we still would probably end up bringing in some portables, just because we don't want to build for 9,000 people when we don't have 9,000 people there every day, because we don't want to put the budget up that high. But we are rebuilding what we felt was a good number to handle the facility most of the time and give ADA and all of those type. And there are other restrooms on site in different locations. But if you built out for 9,000 people to be there all the time, that's what you would need.
And
So-
so it's the total
The
of the
proposed total is
existing.
what we're looking at putting in.
Oh, okay. So just under the building code
Right.
requirements
And then,
often.
the existing total, there's only 39.
Okay.
We're looking at taking it up in numbers.
And if you're still in the design phase, and this is my question, if this is a good time to insert this, but also, I guess my direct question is, are there family and or gender neutral restrooms available?
It is not there are family restrooms available. There was not anything out of gender neutral at that point. But we stopped also at the 60% design because building codes change all the time, and we didn't want to get to the fine tuning of everything and then fall into a different cycle of building code that had been adopted. So we're at a comfortable spot to stop right now. And then moving forward to that last 40% does all of the fine tuning that's required for building codes. And we didn't want to spend that money and then have it sit on a shelf and expire and have to redesign that portion.
So there's an opportunity to look at that.
Yes, there are still opportunities out there.
So just, if I could, one quick follow-up, I know we're short of time, but so the full build out with renovation married up with the existing facilities, you basically have about 9,000 seats. Is that
That's correct.
Okay, so the code for 9,000 seats combines all the exist, but that's what I'm confused by, because you have your
We
existing.
can actually make it up with portables.
Well,
Yeah.
but if I'm reading the table correctly, existing totals, and we've said these are not facilities that are going to be demoed, they're going to be retained. the part of the grandstand complex, which I assume
It,
factors in.
just the South Grandstand. There are some in the Go Buckle Room and there are some in the Western Village, but no
Okay.
restrooms that are on the north phase where this project is will be retained. They will all be removed and rebuilt.
Okay,
So some of these are being removed and then
Oh, I see.
rebuilt out at different numbers.
Okay.
Because right now, the Northeast Grandstand has 5. We're gonna be putting 10 in.
that's, fine. Yeah, I was getting ahead of myself. So you're saying you'll be able to meet code.
Absolutely.
That's
Yes. But as I say, we stopped at this point because the codes changed so much. And we didn't want to go have a perfectly 2 code set of plans that sat on the shelf for the last 3 years.
That never happens, right?
And just correct me if I'm wrong, most of the, really, really expensive energy code changes really aren't going to apply to this building because most of it's not inside.
That's correct.
Does anyone have anything further? I guess I'll say I supporting this at some level. I'm not sure if we'll get to 250,000, if that's the request. But we'll see what we can do and ask our staff to explore that with us at the end of the summer.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you for coming.